What you are about to witness is one of the most intense confrontations ever captured between a police officer and a judge. It is a story about arrogance, authority, and the moment when a badge collides with the law itself. When a 38-year-old police sergeant named Derek Thompson walked into Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom, he carried with him not just a citation but an attitude that would destroy his career. He came to fight a parking ticket, but what unfolded became a defining lesson in humility and respect for judicial power. It was a normal Wednesday morning in Providence Municipal Court. The cases were simple: traffic violations, parking tickets, minor infractions. Judge Frank Caprio, known for his calm wisdom and fairness, presided as always with the kind of authority that only decades on the bench can give. The room was filled with citizens waiting to settle their fines, a few police officers, and clerks handling paperwork. The rhythm was predictable, until the courtroom doors opened with an abrupt slam. Officer Derek Thompson entered, his polished boots clicking loudly on the tile floor. He moved with confidence bordering on arrogance. His uniform was spotless, his cap perfectly aligned, his badge gleaming as if it could shield him from accountability. He wasn't there as an officer enforcing the law. He was there as a defendant, but his body language suggested he hadn't accepted that yet. 3 weeks earlier, Thompson had parked his personal vehicle in a handicapped space outside Tony's restaurant during lunch. Someone had reported it, and he was cited by a parking enforcement officer who, ironically, served under his own department. The fine was $300+ court costs. For any civilian, it would have been a simple matter: pay the fine or explain the mistake. But for Thompson, this wasn't about a ticket. It was about pride. He believed his badge gave him leeway that civilians didn't have. The clerk called out his name: Officer Derek Thompson. He walked to the stand without removing his cap, hands resting on his belt like he was still in command. Judge Caprio looked up from his file, studying the officer in silence. "Officer Thompson," the judge said, his tone even, "you're charged with parking in a handicapped space while off duty in violation of City Ordinance 127. The citation was issued March 15th outside Tony's restaurant. How do you plead?" Thompson's reply set the tone for what was to come. "Not guilty, Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but dismissive. "This citation represents a misunderstanding of parking enforcement policies as they relate to law enforcement personnel." Judge Caprio placed his pen down, a small but telling gesture. "Were you on duty at the time?" "No, sir," Thompson answered, "but as a sworn officer, I maintain responsibilities that require flexible interpretation of certain civilian restrictions." The courtroom fell silent. It wasn't the first time a police officer had appeared before Judge Caprio, but few had come with this level of entitlement. The judge leaned slightly forward. "Were you responding to an emergency, Sergeant?" Thompson hesitated. "Not exactly, Your Honor, but police officers must remain ready to act at any time. That requires some operational flexibility." "I see," Caprio said, his tone patient. "Can you point me to the specific law or policy that allows off-duty officers to disregard handicapped parking restrictions?" Thompson blinked, caught off guard. "Well, Your Honor, it's understood in law enforcement that operational protocols can supersede minor ordinances. It's common sense for those of us who actually enforce these laws every day." The murmur that rippled through the courtroom made it clear everyone had heard the disrespect in his tone. The officer had just implied that the judge, a man who had interpreted and applied the law for decades, lacked understanding of how the law worked in practice. Judge Caprio's voice remained calm. "Officer Thompson, are you suggesting that your experience on the street gives you greater authority to interpret the law than this court?" Thompson smirked slightly, mistaking composure for weakness. "I'm just saying, Your Honor, that theory and practice don't always align. Those of us enforcing the law day to day understand things differently than those behind a bench." That was the moment everyone in the room knew the officer had gone too far. Caprio removed his glasses and set them neatly beside his papers. "Sergeant Thompson," he said quietly, "you've questioned this court's understanding of law enforcement. Let's explore your case together." He opened the file. "You mentioned you're a sergeant in the Providence Police Department's Traffic Division. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Thompson said with pride. "So you supervise officers who enforce traffic and parking regulations." "That's right. And how do you instruct your officers to handle violations involving off-duty personnel?" Thompson paused, realizing he was being cornered. "We handle those on a case-by-case basis." "That's not my question," Caprio said, his tone firming slightly. "Do you tell your officers that off-duty police are exempt from handicap parking laws?" Thompson's jaw tightened. "No, Your Honor." "Because there's no such exemption under Rhode Island law, is there?" "No, Your Honor." "Then why?" Caprio asked. "Did you believe you were entitled to one?" The confidence drained from Thompson's face. "I was under the impression." "You were under the impression," Caprio interrupted, "that your badge granted you privileges not afforded to others. You've confirmed there's no such law. You've admitted you were off duty and not responding to an emergency. So tell me, Sergeant, what defense remains? Thompson swallowed hard. Officer discretion, Your Honor. Caprio's voice rose slightly, though still calm. This isn't the street, Sergeant. This is a court of law. You are not exercising discretion. You are being held accountable. The silence in the room was thick. Even Thompson seemed to realize he had just lost control of the situation. Sergeant Thompson, Caprio continued, opening another folder. Since you've questioned this court's understanding of law enforcement, I reviewed your department's manual and professional record. Thompson's eyes flickered nervously. According to Section 4.23 of your department's policies, the judge read, off-duty officers are explicitly required to obey all civilian laws and regulations. Were you aware of that policy? Yes, Your Honor, Thompson muttered. Caprio didn't look up, and according to your internal affairs file, you've been reprimanded twice for unprofessional conduct towards civilians and for what your supervisors described as abuse of authority. Does that sound accurate? Thompson's posture stiffened. Your Honor, I don't see how my personnel record. Oh, but it relates perfectly, Caprio said sharply. You're displaying in this courtroom the same arrogance that appears in those reports, the same belief that your badge puts you above the rules. Every word hit like a hammer. Thompson's bravado was collapsing under the weight of documented truth. Caprio set the file down. Sergeant Thompson, this court finds you guilty of the handicapped parking violation. The fine is $300 plus costs. Thompson exhaled, relieved it was finally over. But the judge wasn't done. Additionally, Caprio said, I'm finding you in contempt of court for your conduct and your attempt to use your authority to influence these proceedings. Your fine will include an additional $500 penalty. The courtroom gasped. Thompson looked stunned. Your Honor, you can't. I can, Caprio interrupted. And I will. I'm also forwarding a transcript of these proceedings to your department's Internal Affairs Division, along with my recommendation for additional training in legal compliance and professional conduct. Thompson's mouth opened, but no words came out. Furthermore, Caprio continued, given your repeated disciplinary history and your statements today, I'm recommending that your department review your fitness for supervisory duties. The sergeant's confidence was gone. His face had drained of color. Your Honor, you're destroying my career over a parking ticket. No, Sergeant, Caprio replied, standing now. You destroyed your own career the moment you tried to lecture a sitting judge about the law and revealed you don't understand the very principles you swore to uphold. The judge stepped closer to the bench, his voice measured but commanding. I've practiced law for 45 years, Sergeant. I've sat on this bench for 35. I've handled hundreds of thousands of cases, criminal, civil, and disciplinary. And if there's one truth I've learned, it's this: the moment an officer believes his badge places him above the law, he ceases to serve justice. Thompson stood motionless, unable to respond. Caprio continued, his tone quiet but firm. You came here thinking your uniform entitled you to special treatment, but in this courtroom your badge means nothing without integrity. The law applies equally to all, judge, citizen, and officer alike. The judge lifted his gavel. Your total fine is $800 with court costs, plus $500 for contempt. Court is adjourned. The gavel struck. The sound echoed through the chamber like a closing door. Thompson stood frozen, humiliated. The officers in the back of the courtroom exchanged uneasy glances. Some looked sympathetic, others angry, but everyone knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. As the room emptied, Captain Maria Rodriguez, Thompson's commanding officer, approached him. Her expression carried a mix of disappointment and regret. I watched the whole thing, she said quietly. That judge just did what I've been trying to teach you for years. You don't earn respect by flashing a badge, you earn it by showing it. Thompson avoided her gaze. I didn't think it would go that far. It always does when arrogance replaces judgment, she said simply. You'll be hearing from Internal Affairs. Outside the courthouse, the local press was waiting. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Within hours, the footage was online. The video of Sergeant Thompson's humiliation went viral. 2 million views in a single day. The internet dubbed it the day the badge met the bench. Law enforcement blogs analyzed every second of it. Legal commentators praised Judge Caprio's calm dismantling of arrogance. Police academies began circulating the video as training material under the heading, Respect for Judicial Authority. But for Thompson, the fallout was only beginning. Internal Affairs opened a formal review within 48 hours. The transcript of the hearing, combined with his prior disciplinary record, painted a damning picture. After 15 years on the force, Thompson had gone from a respected sergeant to a cautionary tale. He was suspended pending investigation. The badge he had worn so proudly now sat locked in an evidence drawer, a symbol of authority misused. And as his hearing date approached, one thing became clear. His career in law enforcement would never be the same again. 3 weeks after that fateful courtroom exchange, the Providence Police Department's Internal Affairs Division summoned Derek Thompson for a formal hearing. The transcript of his confrontation with Judge Caprio had already circulated through every level of the department. The video had been viewed millions of times, and what was once pride had now become public humiliation. Inside the department, the incident was more than a scandal. It was a warning. The commanding officers knew that how they handled Thompson's case would send a message to every uniformed officer about accountability, humility, and respect for the rule of law. Thompson walked into the Internal Affairs office wearing civilian clothes, stripped of his badge and sidearm pending review. The conference room was silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights. 3 senior officers and a department attorney sat at the long table. At the head sat Captain Maria Rodriguez, the same superior who had watched himself destruct in Judge Caprio's courtroom. Sergeant Thompson, Rodriguez began, "This hearing is to determine your conduct in court on April 5th and whether your behavior violated departmental ethics, professionalism, or our oath to uphold the law." Thompson nodded, his tone subdued. "Yes, ma'am." The department attorney opened a file. "The department has received a judicial recommendation for review of your supervisory fitness. Judge Caprio specifically referenced repeated patterns of arrogance and abuse of authority. You're aware of this?" "Yes," Thompson replied quietly. The attorney continued, reading from the report. "During your court appearance, you argued that your badge placed you above municipal parking laws, questioned the judge's understanding of law enforcement, and displayed open disrespect to the bench. You were found guilty, fined, and held in contempt of court. Is this accurate?" Thompson exhaled. "Yes, sir, that's accurate." Rodriguez folded her hands. "Before we deliberate, we'd like to hear your explanation." He paused. For the first time in his career, Derek Thompson didn't have a prepared answer. The old reflex to justify to deflect was gone. "I was arrogant," he said finally. "I thought my experience gave me authority to interpret the law as I saw fit. I was wrong. The judge was right. I disrespected the court, the department, and what this badge stands for." Rodriguez studied him carefully. "Do you understand how that attitude damages public trust?" "Yes, ma'am, I do now. When I walked into that courtroom, I thought I represented law enforcement. Instead, I became the reason people stopped trusting it." The board deliberated in private for 45 minutes. When they returned, the room was silent again as Rodriguez delivered the decision. "Sergeant Derek Thompson," she said, "effective immediately, you are demoted to patrol officer. You will be placed on probation for 12 months, required to complete 40 hours of continuing education in constitutional law, professional ethics, and civilian relations. Failure to complete this program or any further display of misconduct will result in termination." Thompson nodded slowly, accepting the punishment. "Understood, Captain." She added quietly, "This doesn't have to be the end of your career, Derek. It can be the beginning of a different one, if you learn the lesson." For months, Thompson disappeared from the spotlight. The viral video continued to circulate, replayed on news channels and social media as an example of accountability. It became required viewing in police training seminars. Captions read, "The day a judge taught a sergeant the meaning of the law." While others debated his downfall, Thompson began the slow process of rebuilding. He attended every class the department required and then some, lectures on constitutional rights, community engagement, and the psychology of authority. The more he learned, the clearer it became that his problem had never been ignorance of the law. It had been ignorance of humility. He started working night shifts again, patrolling neighborhoods he hadn't seen in years. Gone was the swagger that once defined him. When he spoke to civilians now, he listened more than he talked. He wrote fewer citations and gave more warnings, focusing on education rather than punishment. The transformation didn't happen overnight, but over time people noticed. 6 months after the courtroom incident, Thompson was called back to Providence Municipal Court, not as a defendant, but for a traffic case involving another driver. Judge Caprio was on the bench that day. When the docket reached his name, there was a brief pause. The judge looked up, recognition flickering in his eyes. "Officer Thompson," he said evenly, "good morning." Thompson stood straight, no longer hiding behind his uniform but humbled by experience. "Good morning, Your Honor. It's good to see you again." Caprio raised an eyebrow. "I trust this time you're not here to argue the law." A faint smile crossed Thompson's face. "No, sir. I'm here to uphold it." The courtroom chuckled softly, but behind the humor was respect. Genuine, hard-earned respect. Caprio nodded, seeing the change for himself. "Officer Thompson," he said, "what happened 6 months ago was unfortunate, but if you've learned from it, then justice has served its higher purpose." "Yes, Your Honor," Thompson replied. "I've learned that the badge doesn't protect you from the law. It binds you to it even more." Caprio leaned back. "Then perhaps that day did more for you than any disciplinary hearing could." After court adjourned, Thompson approached the bench privately. "Your Honor, I wanted to thank you. I thought you were destroying my career that day, but you saved it. You made me see what I couldn't before." Caprio smiled gently. "The purpose of justice isn't to destroy, officer. It's to correct. You just had to be willing to listen." From that moment forward, Thompson made it his mission to help younger officers avoid the mistakes he had made. He began volunteering at the police academy, speaking to recruits about accountability and respect. His story became a cautionary tale, a real-life example of what happens when pride eclipses duty. Law enforcement isn't about power, he would tell new cadets. It's about responsibility. When you put on that uniform, you represent the law, but that doesn't mean you are the law. The moment you start thinking you're above it, you're finished. His message resonated. Cadets listened because he spoke from experience. He didn't quote regulations, he told a story about losing everything he thought he was entitled to, only to earn back something more valuable. Honor. Within 2 years, Thompson had regained the trust of his department. His evaluations reflected consistent professionalism, empathy, and calm judgment. Eventually, he was promoted again, this time not because of seniority or connections, but because of genuine merit. When asked about his journey, he would often mention Judge Caprio's name. That man didn't just judge me, he'd say. He educated me. He reminded me that the law isn't a weapon, it's a promise. Meanwhile, the video that started it all continued to spread. Universities used it in courses on criminal justice ethics. Police departments worldwide included it in seminars about authority and respect. The clip of Caprio saying, "Your badge is a symbol of service, not supremacy," became a motto printed on training posters in several departments. Journalists called it the most important courtroom moment ever caught on camera. But to those who understood its real impact, it wasn't about viral fame. It was about a man's transformation from arrogance to accountability, and a judge's ability to teach through discipline rather than destruction. Years later, Thompson attended Judge Caprio's retirement ceremony. When the judge saw him in the crowd, he smiled warmly. "Officer Thompson," he said, extending his hand, "it's good to see you still serving with honor." Thompson shook his hand firmly. "You gave me the chance to earn that, Your Honor. I'll never forget it." The two men stood there for a moment, one who had spent a lifetime upholding the law, the other who had once challenged it and learned its true meaning. The story of that day in Providence Municipal Court lives on not just in video archives but in classrooms, training manuals, and conversations among officers who remind each other what respect truly means. Because that morning wasn't just about a parking ticket. It was about accountability, humility, and the enduring truth that authority, without respect, collapses under its own weight. Judge Caprio's lesson echoed far beyond the courtroom that real justice doesn't need to shout. It speaks through integrity, knowledge, and fairness. And for Derek Thompson, it became the foundation on which he rebuilt both his career and his character. He would later tell a class of recruits, "If you ever forget what this badge means, remember my story. Remember that the courtroom is where arrogance dies and respect for the law begins." And somewhere in the archives of Providence Municipal Court, the transcript of that hearing still stands as a testament to one undeniable truth. No matter who you are or what you wear, in the eyes of justice, everyone stands equal.